Welcome to your first video about rhetoric. So you've finally read in the Top Hat book your first reading selection for the semester or for the summer, and it was about rhetoric. And maybe you have learned all about this in your own school, in high school. Maybe you haven't heard about this at all in your life. And if you are that person, welcome to my world. I am doing a PhD in rhetoric and composition. I am in my fourth year. And believe it or not, right before I started teaching composition, I really didn't get what the big deal was about rhetoric. I was interested in composition, interested in writing, but I didn't really know much about rhetoric. So um, it is important, though, if you think, like, what's the big deal? It will be important for your 1101 and 1102 success in composition, but honestly, not to be too dramatic, I think it's going to be pretty helpful for your life. It's really brought a lot of clarity to me about how to be an effective communicator in all kinds of situations. So, a lot of people think when they think of the term rhetoric, just like empty political biased speech that's harmful necessarily. It's all rhetoric, is what a lot of people say. But we're here to kind of debunk that myth, and we're going to look at what rhetoric has meant from some theorists or from some people in the past and how we use it today to make sense of communication and composition. So if you have no real understanding of why this is important or what's the big deal about it, don't worry, you are in the right place. We're going to make a little bit more sense of this. So while there are many different ways that people over the years have defined rhetoric, I'm going to go with Aristotle's definition, and he thinks that rhetoric is the art of discovering the means of persuasion. So, in other words, by means, we mean the methods. What are the things that we use in order to make a point to persuade? So, he suggests that there are three main ways we do that, and he calls them appeals. So, when you are talking, writing to your audience, and how do you do that? Well, you do it through these three things. So, we're going to go through each and kind of understand them. So let's use the example of getting somebody in your life to give or loan you something that you want. And I'm going to say, let's get your grandmother to give you $2,000 because you really need to buy a car. All right, so there is ethos, which means an appeal to credibility. And so basically, what it's asking you to do is talk to your audience about your relationship to them, essentially. Why should they trust you? So, in the example of the grandmother, you can remind your grandmother about all the great times that you've had in the past. What a wonderful grandson or granddaughter you have been, and so using that connection is going to help out. If we're talking about getting somebody to explain something a little bit more nuanced to an audience where maybe it's not their family, perhaps there's some kind of scientist trying to explain the effects of COVID-19, or perhaps it's a CDC member trying to explain to the public why we should or shouldn't use masks. Well, you need to have credibility. Your relationship to the audience needs to be established. So you need to show that you have specific credentials. You are an expert. You don't want to listen to somebody, a random person off the street, tell you whether you should or should not wear a mask, right? Your relationship to the audience makes a lot of sense, makes a lot of importance to whether or not you're persuasive. So you might listen to somebody who's studied epidemiology for the last 8 years, but you might not listen to somebody who does haircuts. That means that the person who does haircuts could be super, super smart, but you think about their ethos and you feel like you'd rather have somebody with a different set of credentials helping you understand. Another way to build your credibility is to be fair minded. So think back to being the grandson or granddaughter asking a grandparent to loan you money. You want to be honest and say, hey, I know that I have a great reputation with you. I always do what you asked me to. Oh, there was that one time where I kind of messed up and I acknowledge my mistakes, but I will do better in the future. So in other words, you don't try to hide anything. You're very fair-minded, and that builds your honesty and your credibility. Another thing that affects your credibility can be your tone, your structure, some of the things that you're going to use to actually deliver that. But these are the main elements of credibility. So that's one way that you make your persuasive point, is through your own credibility or through appealing to the credibility of your sources. Another way that you're going to make your point, this is kind of the major thing we think of, is logos. You're going to give your audience good reasons that make sense. So you're using information in the form of premises to reach some conclusion. Your conclusion for your grandmother is, give me that money. What are your reasons? So you're going to present different evidence, facts, and statistics. Maybe not so much facts and statistics for that whenever you're trying to tell your grandma to loan you money, but if you're trying to tell people to wear masks during COVID, you might present these kinds of things. Also, you're going to present them in a kind of order that makes sense to them so that they can understand what you're talking about and give you a reason to do the conclusion. So, in other words, if you just hand somebody a piece of paper with a bunch of percentages and data on it, they're not going to understand it. You have to arrange it so that they see the relevant details and it makes sense at the end. So basically, the evidence and the arrangement is going to lead your audience to accept that claim, and that is using logos. So, for example, if you're doing the asking your grandmother, your logical appeal would be giving her reasons to lead to her giving you the money. So maybe you say, Grandma, I really need the money, and here's why. I don't have enough money right now to buy a car. I'm going to school full time, so I don't have enough time to get a job. I need a car in order to go to my internship. Therefore, if I have the money, I'm going to be able to be successful in the future and I'll be able to take care of you in your older age. So, those are the kinds of appeals to reason you're going to be using. And then the last one that people are sometimes pretty skeptical of, but really is an effective way to get people to do stuff, is appeal to their emotions. So, what you're going to do when you're doing that is you're going to create emotions in the audience, any kind of emotion, through maybe your delivery. So if you're speaking, maybe you get teary eyed, maybe you gesture in a way that shows that you're just very sad if you're trying to make them sad. If it's a painting, maybe you use really bright colors to make them extremely happy and excited. Um, you deliver in a certain way. Also, you can use compelling examples, anecdotes, or stories that create these kinds of feelings in your audience. Sometimes your word choice is going to give them different kinds of emotions. So all of these are the rhetorical appeals, and we're going to talk a lot more about it. Maybe it seems overly simple, and that's because it's pretty simple. We use this all the time. However, when we start thinking about who we are, our position, our relationship to the audience, our purpose for speaking, these things get a little bit more complicated, and there's a lot to talk about when it comes to being as effective and as thoughtful and fair-minded as possible in our persuasion. So stay tuned.